We're pleased to welcome a distinguished panel of experts today on gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth issues to First Church, and we're grateful that they've taken the time to volunteer with us. Adolescence can be a very tough time, but what does it mean to be a sexual minority young person? Far too often, when a young person's sexual orientation does not mirror the mainstream, adolescence can turn from difficult to dangerous. Despite significant progress in recent decades, still the statistics surrounding sexual minority youth are alarming. Here are some of those sobering facts. Over 30% of all reported teen suicides each year are committed by gay and lesbian youth. 26% of gay and lesbian youth are forced to leave home because of conflicts regarding their sexual orientation. Approximately 40% of homeless youth are identified as gay, lesbian, and bisexual. Approximately 28% of gay and lesbian youth drop out of high school because of fear or discomfort over verbal or physical abuse in the school environment. And finally, gays and lesbians are at much higher risk than the heterosexual population for drug and alcohol abuse. So how do we create families, faith communities, schools, societies that support young people who may not conform to mainstream norms of sexuality and gender identity? And as members of a socially conscious faith community, such as here at First Church, how can we both individually and collectively help to make a positive difference in the lives of gay and lesbian youth? Well, perhaps today's panel can help, so let me introduce them to you. Starting on my immediate right, Dawn Holt and Sean Simpkins. Dawn and Sean's son came out over 8 years ago. At the age of 14, that day changed their lives, and they've been active in the struggle to support equal civil rights for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender youth ever since. Dawn and Sean feel that their most important work is in helping other families to successfully navigate the coming out process. Dawn is currently the president of PFLAG Portland, which meets here at First Church, and Sean manages the chapter's website. Next to them, Joyce Lilleholm. I hope I pronounced that correct.
Lil, you're home, but we accept anything respectful.
Joyce graduated from Smith College and has a master's in school counseling from Lewis and Clark College. Retired from counseling in the Portland Public Schools, Joyce was an adjunct professor at Lewis and Clark. She has been active as a volunteer both on behalf of sexual minority youth, both in schools and in faith communities. She is a member of the Oregon School Counselor Association, the Oregon School Counselor Association. Joyce is also one of the founders of the Oregon Safe Schools and Communities Coalition and serves on their board. Next, Kevin Donegan is a program director at Janus Youth Services. Janus Youth is one of 4 agencies that serve homeless youth in Multnomah County. Janus works closely with Outside In, New Avenues for Youth, the Native American Youth and Family Association to provide a wide array of services to youth and young adults between the ages of 13 and 25. Kevin grew up in Northwest Montana, graduated from Eastern Montana College where he received a master's degree in counseling. He worked in Central America through the Peace Corps and since 2000 has been program director for homeless youth shelters, street outreach programs, drug and alcohol treatment programs, and transitional housing and independent living programs at Janus. And then finally, Jessica Lee is the queer youth organizer at Basic Rights Oregon. Jessica is a second-generation Korean American, born and raised in Washington State. She received a Bachelor of Arts from Evergreen State College, where she was a campus organizer for the Women of Color Coalition. She then joined Planned Parenthood of Western Washington, providing community education and clinical assistance for 3 years. Jessica relocated to Portland and joined Basic Rights Oregon's field team in 2006, where she currently coordinates youth organizing program and alliance building network. Jessica is also an active member of the Oregon Safe Schools and Communities Coalition and the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. Let's welcome our panelists to First Church.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk. And because PFLAG, Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, the Portland chapter does meet here, I think of this as my home. And I think of the room over there as our room, too. So thank you for having us. We really, really appreciate it. So our story is probably typical, but probably atypical all at the same time. Our son was 14 when he came out. That's still pretty young. And it was pretty much the classic, Mom, I've got something to tell you. And Sean was out of town, I think. It was just me and Christopher at home then. And he said to me, "Mom, I think I'm gay." And trying to be, you know, the good mom that I am, I said, "Well, that's okay, that's fine." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, it may not be a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to me." And I thought, I've blown it. I'll go out, come back in, we'll start again. But that was how I found out. And we're often asked, did you know if Christopher was gay before he told you? And my answer is, actually, no. It hadn't really formulated in my consciousness that my son might be gay. Although. It probably should have.
In retrospect, there were certain signs.
Yes. Christopher has some little bit of stereotypical stuff. We probably should have thought about it, but it really hadn't. He was still pretty young. And so that's, you know, sort of the basis of our story. I told Sean when he got home from his trip, and there you go. That's how we got started. I think one of the points we wanted to make is that that's really just the beginning. And you know, I have no idea how much time I have, so stop me. Okay. That's really just the beginning. Is when your child comes out to you, that's the beginning of the process. And I think as a family, there's then the opportunity to talk about that, to decide what that means to you, to decide how you're going to support your child. But then the next step becomes the coming out process for the family. That's the point, I think, that PFLAG really works with families. And that's the point that can be a long, if not never-ending process. A lot of times when people do come to PFLAG, that's a lot of where their questions are from, is what do I do now? Now that I know my child is gay, what do I have to do? And the assumption seems to be almost that you have to get out your Rolodex or go through your email, your Outlook friends group and just tell everybody all at once. And I really don't think that needs to be the case. I think it's as the family is comfortable and as things unfold, I think the family kind of naturally and gradually comes out. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, I'd like to present a few words on the dad's perspective.
Yeah, that'd be good.
As we've gotten more and more involved with PFLAG and the movement, a lot of times what we find, or what I found is that sometimes dads tag along behind moms in the entire coming out process and then supporting of their child. Other times, dads can actually lead the process. In our case, I think one of the reasons why we talked about there were certain signs when Christopher was younger that we just simply didn't notice because it really wasn't that important to us. We really didn't think in terms that you might think, okay, this is a boy, this is a girl,
right.
So forth and so on. It was just simply Christopher was Christopher.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I first tried to do, as Dawn said, was I come from a profession in which problem solving, identification, and solving is my stock in trade. So instantly, you know, I was trying to say, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do?
Yeah.
How do we solve this? How do we make sure that this is going to be okay for Christopher? How do we make sure that Christopher is going to grow up to be Christopher and nobody else? Not who we wanted him to be, not who anybody else wanted to be, who Christopher wanted to be. And one of the things that we learned very, very quickly is that Christopher was our guide.
Yeah,
that Christopher had gone through the same process that we were now embarking on with his coming out, that he did. And it took a few years, although actually it only took about 6 months for us to start getting really involved. That was our way of supporting Christopher, as well as just simply being good parents to Christopher and making sure that he had all the support and love that we as parents could give him. We also realized that the thing that we needed to do for our own coming out process and to support Christopher and all the kids like him was to try and improve the world that he lived in. So, and we found that particularly parents of our generation, as opposed to the parents of kids who came out 30 years ago, when the Stonewall era, when the entire movement really started. They are much more outwardly focused than they are inwardly focused. Of course, there's a wide spectrum of parents' reactions and actions, but we find that parents really want to change the world. They really want to help make the world better for their kids and for everybody's kids.
So one of the ways that seems to happen a lot, obviously, is with the schools. And I'm wondering if we could bring Joyce into the conversation to talk a little bit about safe schools and about providing safe spaces for kids in this process of coming out and exploration.
Well, I want to mention that I'm affiliated both with church groups and with school groups in my advocacy for sexual minority youth. We started Oregon Safe Schools looking at what was going on in the state of Washington and asking those folks if we should duplicate what they're doing or just tag along with them. And they said, no, there's a need in each state for people having trouble in their schools with kids being harassed and so forth. They need to know local contacts here in Oregon. And so that's why we, a group of us, started our organization, like I say, patterned after the one in Washington. And I want to emphasize, as we work to have schools improve, that there are schools doing a pretty good job, and there are healthy sexual minority kids. There's research out of Eugene and the prevention researcher that shows if your faith community is supportive, your parents are supportive, and your school is supportive, the fact that you're attracted to a same-gender person or the fact that you identify trans, I will say the research was on gay and lesbian, but if you're affirmed in the communities most important to you, you don't see the risk behaviors or people attempting or dying by suicide. So I just want to lift up healthy sexual minority youth. We have workshops that we put on with Oregon Safe Schools, and we get phone calls or emails asking for help. I would lift up Pendleton as an example, Forest Grove as an example, where parents and young people have wanted, for example, to have a gay-straight alliance club in the schools where they would advocate that everyone be treated respectfully, where they would have safe space posters. And there would be community response, whether it was irate parents or an administrator who lacked confidence. And they would say, well, no, we can't have a gay-straight alliance club. And what we could do was bring the education to the administrators about the laws, involve the ACLU of Oregon, which is also extremely supportive. And we have found many school administrators who are willing to do the right thing when they have the backing, when they have the understanding of the laws. And there are a couple of laws that really stand out. There's an equal access law that's federal. So if you're going to have any non-curricular club, so it's not a math club, you know, it's the ski club or whatever, you have to allow a gay-straight alliance. Then we have the non-discrimination law, which is 3 years old now, that you can't discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity, and that applies to public accommodations, it applies to schools. And then a whole coalition of folks, not just our Safe Schools Coalition, but a lot of other folks with strong leadership by Basic Rights Oregon, passed the new anti-bullying law a year ago. And the old anti-bullying law said you shouldn't have bullying. But no real consequences. And so the new law is a wonderful tool for fair-minded administrators because it says, first off, it enumerates categories. So people that think you should interrupt racist remarks, but oh well, as far as sexual minority issues, it enumerates race, religion, and so forth, and includes sexual orientation and gender identity. It also indicates that there needs to be a point person. So you can't pass the buck. It would be great if every single staff member in the building stood up and did good things, but at the very least, the law says there will be an identifiable person and that this will be publicized so that students will know about this person, so that parents will know about this person. You all know about the economy, so this didn't include mandated training and mandated reporting because that would have cost money and we wanted the bill to pass. So it's incumbent on us to check what's going on in the schools that we're connected to. And so to bring the law to bear where it's not being carried out. There is a consequence of losing funding. Things have to be in place at the end of this school year. I mean, it went into effect last summer, but as far as the consequence of losing funding, it would be at the end of the school year that they would be found not in compliance if they didn't have the policy in place and publicized. But it's an opportunity that Oregon Safe Schools, Basic Rights Oregon, ACLU can support you if you're finding things aren't right in your building and you need support.
Jessica, I actually wanted to jump over to you and then come back to Kevin. Let me turn that down a little bit because it sounds too loud. So Basic Rights Oregon has been very, kind of out in the front of this issue in terms of anti-bullying and actually bringing together groups of people to support this process. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you do as a youth organizer and specifically how you view that as helping to really move a lot of these initiatives forward?
Sure, and I'm just going to apologize first and foremost that I think like many other people in this room, I'm fighting a cold right now, so if I cough quite a bit, that's why. So like Joyce mentioned, the organization did come together with many other organizations and groups and interested folks in 2009 during the legislative session to really put some teeth into the anti-bullying law in this state. And that work really came from our youth organizing program, which really launched in 2006. We were doing a lot of work both on college campuses and on K-12, mostly high school campuses as well, talking to students and youth to see what the barriers to accessing a full and complete education were for LGBT, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth in the state were. And clearly bullying, harassment, discrimination were all huge priority issues that youth were dealing with in the schools. And so we wanted to see if there was some way, as an organization like Basic Rights, who really specializes in doing policy advocacy work and changing policy to better the lives of LGBT people in our state, what we could do, and working really closely with Safe Schools and with other student and education associations who are really great allies with us in this work. We really looked at the issue as an issue of bullying and harassment, just towards any student is wrong and should be worked on at a preventative level, but also that there should be real consequences if that happens in a school continuously. So we recognize that anyone who is LGBT or perceived as LGBT or sort of expressing themselves out of what we're really used to seeing as male and female in schools are really high targets of bullying and harassment in schools. And we also know that's not the only reason. We know that if you're different for any reason in your school, you're going to be a target for bullying, and that could be on your appearance, it could be on your faith background, it could be on your racial or ethnic background. So we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just an issue that centered only on LGBT youth, but that it was a broad range of people who could advocate for anybody who is marginalized in our communities and our schools. And so we were really lucky to be able to work with many faith groups, many racial justice, immigrant rights groups, really across the field to push this legislation through so that it was a multi-issue and multi-constituent issue that we were really making a priority at the state level. But what was the most important thing was to have the young people advocate on their own behalf. It doesn't make sense for a bunch of adults to come in and talk about the experiences that young people are experiencing every day, which ideally we have some young people here today, but it's spring break and it's hard to get youth to come in on their spring break. So part of our work at Basic Rights was to really go into the schools all across the state and really find people who had stories who were being bullied and harassed, that they could go directly to decision makers and people in power and tell them what they were experiencing every day and really bring that at a very raw level of this is my everyday experience, and I don't have the power to change what's happening to me, and I'm relying on you to do that. And so hearing the stories that students brought and shared really publicly and openly was really painful for I think many involved, but also really empowering at the same time, and having youth being able to talk on their own behalf and then see what their stories were able to do to create change was a really memorable experience. And so I think that was sort of the highlight of really what pushed that legislation through.
So Kevin, I actually wanted to bring the conversation back to you because obviously you see a lot of the downstream consequences of the process not working as well in your work with both homeless and homeless youth and substance abuse. I think one of the things that was a little bit shocking to me, having only been in the Northwest for about 4 years now, was the number of young homeless people in the Portland metro area, and certainly in Seattle as well. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work and about what you see day to day in working with homeless youth and substance abuse.
Yeah, Janice, did anyone listen to the City Club speech, not yesterday or a couple days ago Friday, but last week Friday? Janice Mora, the executive director of Janice Youth, spoke at the City Club and did a real powerful presentation about the state of youth within the state of Oregon. So if they have it on podcast or something, that'd be great to listen to. We see about, in Multnomah County, we see about 1,000 new youth a year that show up on our doorstep. And they come from primarily, you know, there's a lot of talk around, are we serving a lot of kids that aren't from Portland or Multnomah County? We probably serve, out of that 1,000, 75% of them are from within the Multnomah County, Tri-County area. So you look at Clackamas, Washington County, those areas. And then a smaller percentage come from outlying areas outside of those counties, from rural Oregon. And then even a smaller number are the travelers that really make it from San Diego to Vancouver, British Columbia, and travel along the I-5 corridor. And they're hitting all the cities in between. I think Portland is seen as an accommodating city for young people because of our services that we provide here. In most other cities around the nation, you'll never see a system like Portland has. And there are 4 primary agencies that serve homeless kids. As Dan mentioned, New Avenues for Youth, Outside In, and the Native American Youth and Family Association, along with Janice. Those 4 agencies are coordinated through the county. So our services are coordinated as far as from outreach at the very beginning of service all the way through independent living services. And each agency has a role in those services. And we come together at all different levels, from executive directors to program directors to supervisors to line staff, in coordinating those services. So if a youth walks into Outside In and is receiving services, Janice can look up that information when the youth shows up on our doorstep to figure out what they've received at Outside In, where are they in the system, are they eligible for the system, that type of thing. The primary role that Janice serves is more of the crisis function within the system. We oversee the intake and screening function for the homeless youth system. So any youth that's going to be served at Outside In, New Avenues, or NEA needs to be screened at Janice. And so we'll determine eligibility, and it's pretty basic. They've got to meet the age eligibility between 13 through their 25th birthday. Outside of those age ranges, if they're younger, we'll get them to runaway programs to do family reunification. If they're older, we'll refer them to the adult system. And are they homeless? A young person needs to have experienced 30 days of homelessness or in unsafe, non-viable housing situations. So they may be living at a home where there's a drug lab going on or something like that, and that's considered unsafe, and we'll accept that young person into our system. Then from there, they have access into shelter services, which aren't located too far away, 17th and Alder, roughly. Great building that we rehabbed. It was an old hotel, and we rehabbed it, and it turned out to be a perfect space. We serve 60 kids a night. Every night for the last couple of months, we've been turning away young people from our crisis facility. 30 beds are crisis, so it's first come, first served from night to night. The other 30 beds are reservation, so it's young people that are actively engaged in trying to get off the streets, either through education programs, employment programs, getting into longer-term housing programs. Those individuals can stay in the short-term shelter for up to 4 months. Many of them, it's a couple of weeks here, they travel, they come back for a couple of weeks, they stay for a month, they go somewhere else. Many of them may return home for a short period of time, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose again, and the parents either toss them out or the youth is unable to stay for whatever reason. So as far as gay lesbian youth within the homeless youth system, the streets, this is going to go without saying, but the streets are extremely unsafe. They're really horrific. And I don't think most people know that in the city of Portland, because you don't see what occurs in the evening hours on the streets of Portland or in daytime. Within our programs, I really thank God every day I don't do direct service anymore within this population. I do the fun stuff around personnel and management and budgets and those type of things, meeting with county and city officials. Those are, for me, the fun things. The direct service work, those individuals are dealing with young people every day that are being raped on the streets, attacked, assaulted. It's horrific with what goes on out there. And that's just within the, I'll use the word, normal homeless youth population. Now overlay someone who identifies as queer onto that, and then the additional horrific bullying they get from potentially peers or other individuals. It really is unconscionable.
Yeah, I saw that presentation at Kinder Transport, the last showings last week. It was excellent. People coming from Europe to the United States. It tears kids apart. This part of rejection, and I know someone, particularly in one group, the Friends Meeting House,
young people that come into our system, it's all over the map. Some have pretty serious mental health issues and parents are unable to deal with it. They don't have medical insurance. The youth is unwilling to get help. There could be drug and alcohol addictions with the young person or with the parents. There could be those identity issues where the parents are uncomfortable with that young person and don't want them in their household. So it's all over the map. But again, any young person, I think, when they're developing in their adolescence and identity, to get rejected from the people that are supposed to be the ones that keep them safe and care for them is extremely difficult for the young person. And then they come into the homeless youth system where we, as far as the 4 agencies, receive a lot of training, guidance, education around the population that we serve. And so youth that identify as queer, we have staff that identify that way, information throughout the facilities, even in the shelter in Portland. We were probably one of the first shelters in the nation for youth that has a transgender housing policy, where a young person that comes into our facility, if they identify as trans, we will have a discussion with them around where they feel most safe in the facility, either in the boys' dormitory, the girls' dormitory, and then talk with them about what that means if they decide to go into the dormitory of their choice, as far as being out in public, because an individual going into that dormitory, everybody will know. So if they're not out, the struggles that may occur. And so every night we have youth in facility that identify as trans. So.
I wanted to bring actually the conversation back to Donna and Sean, because obviously you and your work through PFLAG helps to support those strong family units that hopefully will keep people from becoming homeless or choosing a life on the streets. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that in terms of the type of work or the type of issues that you've encountered with parents and kind of working through that process.
Sure. Well, first of all, I really appreciate Kevin's information, but I do want to make it clear that of the youth on the street, about half of them are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. So they're hugely overrepresented in the homeless youth population. And the primary reason for that, well, there's 2 primary reasons. Either they've been kicked out of their house by their parents, or living in the house has become so unsafe due to physical violence or repeated threats or just assaults on their self-esteem that they do choose to leave. So it's a tremendous problem. I don't think that a family that would throw their child out of their house are the families that we see. I think that's a segment of the population of families who have queer youth that we really can never connect with. In all the years I've been with PFLAG, I have not had someone come to me in that particular crisis situation. I think that's really, really unfortunate, because I think we could go a long way to help, but that is kind of the reality of that.
But certainly, and if I could just interject,
yeah.
Certainly certain parents may not be as accepting as the two of you when it comes to, you know, their child and that coming out process. And, you know, there could be a situation where the child felt, you know, so uncomfortable with being in that situation. Maybe there was not physical abuse, but they felt as if they had no other choice but to actually leave that situation. And, you know, I'm wondering, you know, what services and how does PFLAG really structure it to be able to help people work through those issues?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
PFLAG primarily is a safe space for LGBT individuals and their families and their friends. We're not a crisis center. We often get calls from people who are attempting to find information about the coming out process, about their family or friends that have come out to them, and who are wanting to learn more information and wanting to move down the road towards acceptance and celebration and advocacy.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that it's a little bit of a myth that PFLAG is parents, families, and friends of lesbians, gays. Actually, across the United States, and there are 500 PFLAG chapters across the United States, we are all about half and half. About half parents, families, and friends, and about half gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender folks themselves. Maybe to bring it back around to your question, one of the things we've really seen in my chapter in Portland is that people who have come out earlier and it didn't go well and are now adults, or people who have moved to Portland and then come out and it didn't go well, do come to PFLAG to be in an environment that's supportive. So I do think that those folks that have had those very unfortunate experiences in the coming out process still can really benefit from PFLAG, because you're absolutely right. Being rejected by your parents is got to be one of the most devastating things people experience. And I would say every PFLAG meeting or close to it, there's an adult child with us sobbing, crying their eyes out about the rejection they received from their parents even recently or when they were a child. So it's a huge issue. And I do think that PFLAG, because we are a safe space, because we are a family, can help to heal some of that.
I just want to make two comments, because I am a parent of two adult children. To my knowledge, neither of them identify as queer, but I have been volunteering with PFLAG because of my work as a school counselor and young people teaching me about the issues. And so I have two thoughts. One, we have had calls on the helpline from religious people who don't get it yet and care about their kids, but are just devastated that everything is not fitting their religious beliefs. And I've spoken from my religious beliefs, and it helped that I have religious language, but it was very, very difficult. I was not, well, I was successful in engaging in dialogue for quite a while, but what made me feel better was that in this one case I could tell that while I didn't transform the father, that his descriptions, his despairing of what his daughter was doing, I took heart, because the daughter had left home and the daughter had found a welcoming faith community. Yeah. So the other thing I was going to mention, as a school counselor, I've retired, so I can say this now. I helped kids run away, which means sometimes I put them in touch with Janice or Outside In or whatever, but mostly I help them think about their connections. Because they really had never really thought they could ask their friends' parents to take them in. I mean, that just really was not on their radar. And I have more knowledge than they did about which parents are willing to push the boundaries a little bit and which parents wouldn't. And so there were times that I would help kids find a safer place when I had that chance.
So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, and maybe Joyce, if you could comment on this for a second, but obviously the connection between spirituality and religion is an interesting intersect, both for society and also for this particular group here at First Church. You've been active in helping that process through at the UCC Church, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the programs and the things that you have for gay and lesbian youth at the UCC Church.
Yeah, with the United Church of Christ in this region, which is the state of Oregon and Vancouver and White Salmon and then southern Idaho, we were privileged to have several young people from Lake Oswego, from West Lynn, Wilsonville area, come out as gay or lesbian and ask us to work with them. So a gal from the Lake Oswego Church and myself from Portland First met with these young people and developed a curriculum that had to do with scripture, had to do with relationships with parents. And so together, youth and adults, we presented this Bridging Our Differences at Lake Oswego Church, and we presented it at First Congregational. And we split into a group of youth and a group of adults that we presented to, but it was a youth and adult presenter jointly. And then we switched. And every time we've done this, we've also done it in St. Helens at a Presbyterian church there. Every time we do it, the youth didn't really need it, but we set it up as a youth-adult partnership, and that brought the parents. And so the parents had not realized all the challenges that were going on in the schools. And it was a way for the young people to convey things. And it was maybe, at least 10 years ago when this was first started, because one of the young people is now 29. I remember doing a panel together with this young person, and this person said, well, I've done this before as a lesbian. This is the first time I've done this as a trans person. And this young person hadn't shared that with me. So I was there in front of an audience with my fellow panelists and like, okay, I gotta change my pronouns now. And this is new information, but I'm here as an educator. Take a deep breath. But it's been one of the most powerful blessings that I've had, that this young person was embraced by the broader faith community. The family struggled, like many in PFLAG, to embrace their lesbian daughter, and then they started over again to embrace their trans son. So this young man is a real blessing in my life.
So actually I wanted to ask Dawn and Sean again, if they would actually be willing to talk a little bit about, maybe some of the things that you would have done differently in your son's coming out process. I think we all learn as we go through the process, both for ourselves, if we are gay or lesbian or bisexual, transgender, but I think we also learn when we talk about that with other people, and that's probably one of the basic things that PFLAG represents in terms of being able to have those discussions. And it is a learning experience, both individually and for society. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, the thing that occurs to me is fairly broad. I wish my son hadn't had to come out for me to be so aware of how heterosexually biased and how much homophobia there is. I mean, that, for me, when Christopher came out, and your eyes are opened as wide as they are, and I started looking around, frankly, I was appalled and a little embarrassed that it had taken me this long to realize just, kind of what the state of the world is in that regard. I wish I had been more proactive beforehand. There's really not an excuse for me not to have been. I just wasn't quite as aware as I should have been. And I guess, and I'll let you respond too, Sean, but I think just the other thing is, this was a point I was going to make earlier, is once you get started on this road in working around issues in regards to gay, lesbian, bi, and trans folks, you begin to see pretty quickly how similar homophobia is to racism and to sexism and to classism. And we talked about this last night at dinner. We've become like militant. Aggressively.
Nicely militant.
Aggressively very, very liberal. Because it's the same sort of core issue at the heart of all those isms. It's fear. And so I think, and to kind of rounding out that thought, that's been a huge blessing in my life. I feel so much more enriched that I have lots of gay and lesbian, bi, and trans friends, that I have lots of friends in the African American community and the Latino community. My life is far richer for it. Christopher gets the thanks for that. But I wish I had been a little more aware to begin with.
Kevin, what's the #1 challenge that you're facing in the next couple of years? It's interesting. I mean, we talk a little bit about this, and I think in a perfect world, we would have more parents attending PFLAG and less kids that are ending up on the streets. But what do you view as really the challenge moving forward for organizations that serve homeless youth, both here in Portland and nationally?
We really struggle with the higher level resource issue, because we find that when we can engage youth with a case manager and then get them on the road to getting off the streets, looking towards independent and transitional housing programs, once we can get them in that program, our statistics show about an 85% success rate that they leave that program and go on to their own living situation and become productive members of society. It's kind of a funnel when you look at it with street outreach programs we come in contact with. These are duplicated contacts. 30,000 youth within the city of Portland each year our outreach workers make. And then it funnels down into getting youth into our system for services. That's about 1,000 youth a year. And then the funnel gets smaller and smaller, those youth that we can get into higher level services. And there just aren't enough of those services available because they're very expensive to operate. They're 24-hour supervision, on-site services, so they're very expensive to operate. We have wait lists for young people who want to get in. And the other thing is, you can stop this. The other thing is alcohol and drug treatment is horrendous within this population and within the street population, because we've talked about this around rejection from family. And so youth ends up on the street regardless of their sexual orientation, and in order to mask those feelings of loneliness and desperation on the street, they turn to a lot of times to drugs and alcohol. And we get a lot of young people that start experiencing with that and then become addicted to that, and it's just a lifelong nightmare struggle to get clean and sober. When we have young people come to us as far as the intake process, we look at every resource. We look at extended family, we look at friends, we look at if they're of a younger age, other service providers, DHS or other runaway programs. We try to do everything we can to not engage them in our system, because you have to think about 1,000 kids that really aren't supervised. There isn't a lot of adult mentorship there during the daytime or even evenings, and you've got this group together. And I heard a report today on NPR just around adolescent risk taking is huge, and so you get that population alone on the street, and they start engaging in certain activities that just become a lifelong struggle. And so the alcohol and drug treatment within this group is huge as well.
Okay. And Jessica, I know Basic Rights Oregon also has many programs surrounding that, in addition to the legislative action and advocating these issues on a statewide level. In terms of the programs, though, what has been your success, or what has been your understanding of how effective those programs have been, both at school levels and within peer groups, in terms of kind of changing the paradigm of how people view gay and lesbian youth?
To be quite honest, I feel a lot of the policies that have been recently put in place, the non-discrimination law, the anti-bullying law, are so new. We don't really know how well or not well they are, not only in their effectiveness, although it's great that we now have a foundation, but to create that shift in hearts and minds is probably going to take some while to be able to have any measurable ways to find that out, but we know that that's a right step. As far as other programs through Basic Rights, because we are primarily a policy and political action organization, we don't do a lot of the on-the-ground work that PFLAG and Oregon Safe Schools and Janus Youth does. The closest thing that we are able to do, particularly with LGBT youth, is bringing those youth to advocate on their own behalf. And one of the more recent programs that we've started the last couple of years was called Q-Power, which is a long acronym. Folks in the LGBT community really like acronyms, apparently, and so it stands for Queer Portlanders Organizing and Working for Equal Rights, and it's a group of about 10 to 15 young activists in the Portland metro area. And when this group was founded, it was founded by two youth who really understood the impact of homophobia and transphobia in the lives of young people, and really understood what the impact of all the isms that sort of Don was talking about, how those all come together in a certain way, so that they really wanted the group to focus on young people advocating on behalf of their own needs and own issues, but really taking a social justice framework around their activism. And so many of the youth who were involved with that group and who are involved with that group are young LGBT identified folks, and about half of them, I would say, when we started, fell somewhere along the homeless youth spectrum. So they were really able to sort of bring in their own real life experience and using a form of self-empowerment, of social justice and activism to feel empowered and to build relationships and networks. But of course, one of the challenges is that many of those folks didn't have stable living situations, they didn't have the resources they needed to thrive, and our organization couldn't provide those. And we would try to network with other organizations, but there just aren't enough resources and there aren't enough places to go and to get the things that folks need to thrive, even though they have every ability to. And so it's hard to sort of see people with so much potential and the need just to have some really basic resources and not exactly know how to get it to them.
Why don't I actually go ahead and open it up for discussion right now, and take a few questions from the audience. And I guess, Barry, we'll start with you.
Some people, maybe 2 or 3 people on the panel or more, about kids that are really realizing this in their system, that they feel a gender variance of one sort or another, but then that they would have to accept the term gay or something like that. Isn't there a sort of a difficulty with that? Okay.
Accepting the term?
The term gay, yeah.
I have found a lot of adults from 21 to 75 that have trouble with all kinds of labels, but many young people self-identify in some form or other and have a lot of pride. I do have years in the high schools where kids would come at what I would call a questioning stage, and I certainly put a lot of support into saying, you don't have to decide anything today. You've come to me with all of this uncertainty, and I'm here to say it's okay to just be, and to take your time to explore within who you are, how you're feeling, and take your time. There's a handout I use at school counselor conferences that talks about the different approach to young people who come to you saying, I know who I am, and I identify as bisexual, and I'm dealing with my parents, and I want your help, counselor. Well, that's not a place for a counselor to say, oh, take it easy, you don't really know, you're not old enough, you know. The approach needs to be, I'm here for you. But by the same token, if a student comes full of questions, it's not for the counselor to answer those questions. It's for the counselor to affirm and to make the youth aware of resources. And I'm not sure anybody said SMIRC.
Yeah, I thought of that too.
So I want to mention SMIRC because SMIRC doesn't provide housing the way the Janus network of folks, but SMIRC provides counseling. And SMIRC has another letter in there, or another meaning anyway now. So it's Sexual, Gender, and Minority Youth Resource Center. And it's now located on Martin Luther King, used to be out on Belmont. So that's a place that if you meet a youth who's not sure where they can turn, and it's a Wednesday night or a Friday or Saturday, there are open hours for young people to come, and they talk to others who have chosen a label, or there are those who are, well, they have words that I wouldn't use here, I wouldn't use anyway. But I guess I would say gender defiant.
That's it, yeah.
And
Gender
so
defiant.
that's okay, that's who they are. They're choosing not to have any pronouns and to have a name like, I think this person wouldn't mind, Click. So the name Click doesn't sound like Susan, it doesn't sound like John, it's just who they are. So I don't know if that relates to some of your...
Well, it seems that the word gay is placed someone in a box.
I think the word gay is a problem for people who aren't supportive of sexual minority youth, but I think youth who choose the name, most of them if I don't like that word, that's my problem.
I have a comment to make relative to this. I have a granddaughter who is different, and she told me one time, gay is okay within our network because you don't have to focus on this particular aspect or that. It covers the whole. And I thought to say something when gay was pretty negative. She said, no, Grandpa, it's really fine.
Yeah.
And I think that for we who are not in that, to understand that, it may be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I was just going to add a little bit to the terminology. I myself identify as queer, and I know for a lot of people that has a negative connotation, and that can be whatever your experience is, how you've heard the word, how it's been used historically. And a lot of the youth that I work with also identify as queer, or they identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And there's certainly many other terms, pansexual, gender nonconforming, genderqueer. There's just so many ways that people are redefining how they define themselves, and some people don't want to define themselves in any way, and I think that's really okay. And just like this person over here just said, it's the best way to know is to just ask the person how they identify. If you feel it's safe to do that, and if they feel like it's safe to respond, they will tell you how they identify. And when they tell you what their identity is, it's not offensive, it's not wrong, and it just means so many different things for so many different people. And it's okay to ask as long as someone's open to talk about it.
Well, I identify as my name, correct?
I think, I was just going to finish a thought on that. I was going to finish a thought on that question. Okay. I think we have to realize that if we're talking about the youth of today, the term that they use is far less important than what we feel uncomfortable with the term and so forth. If we just simply provide an environment in which the individual feels comfortable in expressing themselves, they'll use the term that they want to use.
Yeah.
And it's our responsibility to make sure that that individual feels safe in doing so. Far more matter of fact about it than we might be.
Frank?
I'm really appreciating being here today, because this is something that when years ago the church decided to become reconciling, it's heading in a direction that is I'm very proud of where it's gotten to at this point. I want to really thank the two Dans for assisting this format to be here. But interestingly enough, I wrote on my comment card here before you even brought it up about how do we make connection between LGBT, minority youth, and religious spirituality. And you kind of touched on it a little bit there. That's a pretty heavy sentence there, I know. But I truly believe that every individual has a spirituality. And one of my things that I was heading toward working on when I got sidetracked for financial reasons was connected. To really become stronger that way instead of running on their own individual paths. And second of all, each one of you in the organization that you're connected with and a part of, have you ever thought about the idea of trying to put as many of those under one roof, one house? So the connection is made a lot faster, a lot quicker, and the strength of each one of you together would be even more powerful than running separately on your own.
Joyce, maybe you can start with that.
That was a lot. I do have a couple of thoughts. The one house, the only thing I noted to do with that is that SMRC, if you spoke to a youth who's gotten the word in any way, I think the one house for identifying sexual minority in some way would be SMRC. The engaging kids in the religious spirituality piece, I don't know how many teens you have at First United Methodist, but you've got more than First Congregational Crossroad downtown. So there's the outreach to youth about spirituality, period. it's not, if you look at the statistics, the Pew Religious Trust, whatever, young people are not responding to organized religion in large numbers. I'm glad to see some younger faces in the room. I don't assume age on anybody.
I'm 24, by the way.
I'm identifying old because I took a senior citizen parking spot. But I think when PFLAG has a speaker on a religious topic, David Weekley, who's openly trans minister, and our pastor's going to come speak in a couple of months, there's big turnout.
There's big turnout.
We don't particularly get high school age coming to PFLAG, but we do get college age individuals coming and seeking, and they'll come on that religious night. Community of Welcoming Congregations is on the web, as well as at Pride and so forth, and that's, I'm supposing this church is a member, but they're good at publicizing all the affirming communities in this area. That's a start at that.
And one quick thing, SMERC does play an active role within the homeless youth system. They have programs, and the different agencies have relationships with them, so that way we're actually having outreach workers go to the drop-in center at SMERC. They have programs within our agencies. So if you're within the homeless youth system, you see all of those services in a collaborative system versus separate.
There's a wonderful study that's just come out. And it was done, I'm sorry I don't have the specifics on it, but it caused a tremendous buzz within PFLAG about 3 months ago. I think it's Princeton, I believe, did a study of all of the surveys and electoral results surrounding LGBT issues. And they did it by state, they did it by age group, they did it by several different demographic breakdowns. And one of the consistent things that they found is that in all states, even the most unsupportive states, the attitudes towards LGBT acceptance and general issues were moving towards acceptance. In our state, it's moving at about 3% a year, things like that. And very definitely, there is a clear distinction between the younger generation and even my generation. So if we look at the average in the country for people over 60 versus 40s versus 20s, there's like a 20-point shift. And very much by about 2012, 2014, 2016 region, you're going to see many of the states, the populations of the states fully supported. So the information is getting out there, but more importantly, it appears to be a generational change. And one of the things we know in working within the movement is that the single most powerful, losing my word here, anyway, knowing somebody who is LGBT. Familiarity is the single reason that causes people to shift their opinions and behaviors.
Jessica, do you want to talk about partnering with ROP and getting rural testimony?
Yeah, that's good.
I actually don't have a ton of information about this. There are other coworkers who are doing this work much more deeply than I am, but at Basic Rights Oregon, we are partnering with the Rural Organizing Project, who is an organization that traditionally started when there were many anti-gay ballot measures at the local levels in rural areas around the state, and they really were able to do some amazing on-the-ground organizing in rural areas that each looked really different. Every community looked different, and were really successful in fighting those off. And now they do a broad range of work around social justice issues. But as we in Oregon are coming up somewhat quickly on a potentially massive and potentially controversial marriage equality ballot measure, we're partnering very strongly with Rural Organizing Project again to go back out in those communities and have this dialogue and to really start talking about it years beforehand, so that more and more people are able to share their identity, if that is safe for them to do, and talk about the issue. But slowly but surely, that shift is going to continue to grow, where regardless of where you are in the state, ideally, you will be able to find supportive folks.
Just wanted to add 2 quick thoughts to that. The difference between my being asked by Basic Rights Oregon to go speak to a legislator who was not my legislator. Hi, you're from Hermiston, and I'm here to educate you about the needs of sexual minority folks. It's like, you don't live in my district. Fine, hi, bye. And then the second time to go merely as a mentor with someone who lived in that district, who spoke and had the attention of the legislator. I was just there because the person was scared to do the speaking, but I was there to support them, and they spoke to their legislator. That made the difference. Second, Lincoln County, that's Lincoln City and the Newport up and down the coast. Several people contacted Oregon Safe Schools in isolation. They didn't know each other. They contacted us separately saying, we're concerned there was a completed suicide, there was a horrific attack on a youth, and concerned what could happen. It was so exciting to, one, show the election results that showed on a recent ballot measure that Lincoln County had been like number 4 behind Multnomah or something, and being pretty supportive. And second, I could introduce them to each other. You're not alone. May I give your name to 3 other people I've heard from? Together, they have made the difference. They formed a PFLAG chapter. They've done groundwork, so there are gay straight alliances in a couple of the schools down there. So is life perfect? No, but this is a rural area that as people came to know each other, they became open, either as a sexual minority person or an ally, and then the whole business of people knowing someone.
Frequently we're asked, did your son experience what you were talking about, was he called faggot in the hall and gay and all that kind of stuff, because a lot of that does still go on. I think we kind of got an advantage. Christopher came out right before he started high school. So we got really proactive. We live in Beaverton, and his homeschool was Southridge High School, which is a big suburban high school, if you know anything about it. At that time, it was still easier to get into the magnet schools in Beaverton, and Christopher's quite artistic, quite musical. So we researched. We went over to Southridge, and we asked questions, and we looked around, and we went as a family, and we went over to Arts and Communication Magnet Academy, which is the magnet school. It's a public high school and middle school. And we did the same thing. We asked questions and we researched, and we actively chose a school where we thought he would be, and with his input, of course, where he thought he'd have a better experience, and that actually worked pretty well. And then so the next big thing is college.
Did you, when you were doing the research, did you identify to the school system that your son was gay?
Oh
yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and in fact, the sort of funny story we have around that is our son chose to go to Pacific University, which I would put a huge plug in. They're out in Forest Grove. That's one of the most welcoming colleges I've ever seen in my life. So when Christopher was making the decision about where to go to school, they have preview days, where family can go out and take a look. So we went out for preview day at Pacific and asked, roundabout questions about housing and that kind of thing, and then asked to speak to a life counselor or whatever they're called, the people that are in charge of housing, essentially. Students' life, that's what they're called.
Residence life. Having overseen residence life at Reed College for 10 years.
Residence life. And sat with this woman, and the 3 of us did not quite have our game plan together, and we were kind of dancing around the issue a little bit, and she left the room to get some information to refer me to counseling, because she thought I was having trouble letting go of my son. Yeah. So she came back in the room, and I said to these 2 guys while she was out, I said, this is ridiculous, we got to lay our cards on the table, because we're not getting anywhere right now. So she came back in, and I said, listen, this is the deal, our son is gay, we want to make sure, and he wants to live in the residence hall, we want to make sure that he doesn't have to be back in the closet, that his roommate's comfortable with it, that this is going to be okay. And she was like, oh yeah, no problem, we still hand match our roommates, and we'll make sure that that works for you. And it really did.
It did.
Yeah, but I think without us being that proactive and saying, you know, as a united family, here's the deal, our son is gay, we want his roommate to be comfortable, we want to make sure this is the right environment for him. You know, I need to be able to sleep at night, I don't want to be worried about my kid. Was a very effective strategy. And I think parents are a little hesitant to be that blunt, but I think it's
dancing
the key.
around and it
Well,
was
even us, yeah, but being, you know, just putting it out there got us where we needed to be. Do you want to add to that?
My younger daughter went to Pacific her first year of college.
Yeah,
and
go Boxers.
it didn't work for her. But when she went out there, the girl 2 doors down was very out, very gay, very lesbian, very out. And she said, Anne said she had a great, the girl obviously had a great experience, but they did. Her parents were totally against it.
Oh, really?
But the girl herself said to the admissions, hey, I'm a lesbian. So they asked her roommate. I mean, they they were very careful.
That's what
so
happened in our case too.
Just one case.
Right. That's good to know. That's good to know.
Pacific was really good about that.
Yeah, they have been.
And I don't think she had any trouble. From what I can tell, or from what Anne said from the dorm life, nobody even, for the most part, blinked.
Yeah.
As a school counselor, I'll tell you, there are now college guides about the schools that are welcoming and gay positive. And I would mention the youth in our faith community who worked on our project and then came out as trans. We, as a faith community, helped that youth find a different high school.
Yeah.
Because that student was in a community where there was one high school and the one high school was not handling it. And we helped that student get into a high school in the Portland area that was supportive. And it took a lot of standing on our heads to make it happen, but 2 of us who are counselors in 2 different schools worked on having that happen.
And I think that's a fantastic place to end the discussion today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you for coming today, and please join us in the fall for our next forum.